done with casting pearls amongst the swine. 'Cause each of us is running out of time. It's already started silent, you won't hear a chime. You'll be measured and punished for each heavenly crime.
Hello and welcome to the Belfast Bapcast. This evening we have on with us Mark Devlin. So there's a lot of noise out there at the moment. Everyone has a take and everyone's selling certainty. What I've always respected about Mark is that he doesn't shout over the noise. He studies its rhythm. Mark's work isn't really about music or politics or secret histories in isolation. It's about patterns. Who sets them, how they repeat, and what happens to a culture when it stops listening to itself. This conversation isn't about convincing anyone or anything. It's about slowing things down long enough to understand what we're actually living inside. So, Mark, thank you for coming on the Belfast Bapcast.
What's up, Mark? Good to be with you on your home turf.
Yes, the main streets of Belfast.
Yep.
So, before the books and before the lectures, who were you before you noticed something was off? Like before you seen behind the curtain, shall we say?
Well, you could say I was a slow learner. It took me a while to get up to speed on things.
Yeah.
So I spent a long time in what you might term normie land, just living a regular life.
Yeah.
I was a DJ for many years. That was my full-time job, radio and club DJ. And I was fortunate enough to travel all over the UK and internationally. Did that for about 20 years full-time. And life was a blast for me back then. It was just like non-stop parties and clubs and music and travel, just having fun.
Dopamine, right?
Yeah, it took me a long while to realise there was anything wrong with the world because the world was working for me. And I think it's that way for a lot of people. If you're having a great time in life, you've got no reason to question things.
Yeah.
You just want the nice lifestyle to continue. But things got to round about 20 years ago, really, 2006, 2007, where I did start questioning a lot of things. I realised that the world was extremely unjust, and I wondered why there was constantly things like war and turmoil and suffering and poverty and famine and injustice, rich people getting away with murder, literally.
Yeah.
And it did start to raise some questions in my mind. And initially, I got diverted off to the work of David Icke. I gravitated towards his books and his lectures, read a couple of his books, started attending some of his talks, and I found that so much of what he spoke about made sense. It actually answered a lot of the questions I'd had up to that point. And then I moved on from just him to looking at other researchers' work, got onto the work of Mark Passio, which really gives you a kick up the arse and makes you examine yourself and your own behaviours and your own contributions to what goes on in the world. And one thing led to another, and then I just found myself firmly immersed in all this stuff, asking all these questions.
Was there a particular moment where you realised culture was curated and not just naturally happening?
It kind of all coalesced for me on a flight coming back from Poland. Very strange thing. It was September 2010. And up to that point, I'd spent a few years studying and questioning and looking at different researchers' work. But for some reason, everything just clicked for me when I had a bit of time on this flight coming back to the UK. And it all just made so much sense. And that was a real turning point in my life because that's where I pretty much knocked the DJing stuff on the head as a full-time job and reinvented myself as a researcher and then eventually a public speaker. I decided to stick my head above the parapet and start going public with
Were you always
some
into
of the things I
research?
found. No, up to that point, not really.
No.
I was just into music.
Because it's pretty prolific now, so it must have just like a fire lit inside you in regards to that, or?
Yeah, well, everything I'd done up to that point was kind of training for everything I'm doing now. So I was traveling around the world as a DJ, playing gigs in different countries and different parts of the UK. And now I'm doing speaking gigs internationally and in different parts of the country. So the DJ gigs were preparatory work for that. And then I was doing radio shows, presenting music. And now I do podcasts where I just talk about meaningful things. So the radio shows were prepping me for that. So it's like everything I did in my life up to that point was preparing me for this reinvention of myself.
Life
And
is a funny way of doing that, doesn't it?
it really does, yeah.
It's almost like it's not by chance. Like,
Yep. I used to think it was all preordained. It was part of some life plan that had been set out for me, whether that was created by some other force or some other entity, or whether it was created by myself in a higher form of consciousness.
yeah, well, I don't think we're not sent anything that we can't handle. You know, your life generally does train you for the outcome, is what I've found. You know, I've ended up in very strange places where if you'd asked yourself like 5 years ago, where, you know, do you see yourself doing this in 5 years' time? It would be the furthest thing from your thought. But a couple of things in life have happened, and all of a sudden you find yourself, you know.
Exactly. I can remember I used to be terrified of public speaking. I did my first public talk on all this stuff in 2012.
Okay.
And prior to that point, if you'd said to me, you're going to be on stage one day in front of 1,000 people with all eyes on you, hanging on your every word and noting everything that you say, I'd have been like, I'm not doing it, mate. I would never do that.
You do
Couldn't
have
handle it.
an orator voice, though.
Yeah, I think I've got what has been referred to as a radio voice many times. So I seem to be
100%.
cut out for doing this sort of thing. But I never imagined I could be doing public talks.
It's
And
almost
prior
like
to
a
the first
calling.
one that I ever did, I was shitting myself. And I was thinking, you know, I rehearsed it for like a week, and I was pacing around the room, working out what I was going to say. And I got up there in front of the audience on the very first speaking gig that I did. And the first 10 minutes were a bit nervy.
Yeah.
But after those 10 minutes, plain sailing. I haven't looked back since.
Ultimate exposure there. You know, there's nowhere for your ego to hide whatsoever. It's all on you. So,
Well, you've just got to do it. It just goes to show, if you want to do something, throw yourself into it. People often say to me, because I've written a bunch of books, and people often say to me, oh, I'd really like to write a book, but I just don't know where to start. What is the process involved? Just start.
Yeah.
You just do it. You sit there with your laptop, write something. There you go.
It seems
You're
to
off.
be these sort of people repeat cycles, though. They'll be asking you, and how do I make a song, or how, you know, but they'll never get around to actually doing anything towards making it. So in 2012, was it exciting at first, or unsettling whenever you discovered that there was more to the picture than meets the eye?
It was more exciting, really. I looked at people like David Icke, and I thought, well, this guy's really making a difference in the world. And he's doing it through books. He's doing it through addressing audiences in public talks. He's doing it through his research and uncovering information. So I thought, I need to be doing that, because the world is clearly messed up. It's got so many things wrong with it. And it needs as many people as possible to contribute whatever they can to finding the right solutions and trying to free humanity from its enslavement. And I thought, well, I've got these resources at my disposal. I know I can write.
Yeah.
I know I can present shows well. I can interview people. So that's what I need to be doing. And it was nothing for me, really, just to do all that. It was very easy. Like I just said, you throw yourself into it and you're off. And there's no looking back.
But I believe there's a personal price to pay whenever you put so much effort into waking people up, and you're maybe not seeing the results you think you should have. Like, do you feel that you've had to detach in any way from the outcome of what you're saying, if you know what I mean? So almost like you're witness, it's not down to you if the outcome, what people do with that information, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, you present it very well and you research it very well, and what happens after you orate it, then it's entirely up to the person what they do with it, you know.
You have to take that mental approach to it. Because I can remember when I wrote the first Musical Truth book, which was 10 years ago now. So spring 2016, that came out. And I self-published it. And I remember thinking, if enough people take on this information and share it far and wide, this sick, satanic industry full of pedophiles and psychopaths is going to be shut down. There's no way it can continue. The BBC, same way.
Yeah.
It's full of pedophiles, as we know.
Yeah.
And if the information gets out there enough and people realise that's what they're paying for with their licence fee, and that's what this institution is all about, it's not going to survive. Fast forward 10 years, here we are.
Everybody
Start of
knows.
2026, BBC still going strong, music industry sicker than ever, more satanic than ever.
More blatant than ever
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, rubbing people's noses in it. So if I took it personally and allowed myself to get upset about the fact that I've put in 10 years of really hard, dedicated work to try and expose the true nature of this industry, and not a whole lot has changed. If I took that to heart, I would get very pissed off, very disillusioned, very demotivated. So you have to separate yourself from the outcome, as you say.
For
It
your
is
own,
up to people
yeah.
what they do with the information. The only important thing from your point of view is your conscience can be clear because you know you did what you could
Yeah.
to try and change the situation.
When you were involved in the music industry itself, were you aware of influence at the time or only in hindsight? Or
At the time, nothing at all.
nothing at all?
No,
Okay.
no. I didn't see anything.
In retrospect?
In retrospect, I never saw any crazy sort of eyes wide shut style parties
Yeah, okay,
and masked elite balls and stuff like that. But in hindsight, I think back to some of the artists that I met. So I interviewed Destiny's Child when they first came out in early 1998. So
Yeah.
I was sat on a sofa with Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, and the two others. And I just thought they were sweet girls. They were very sweet girls. Beyonce was 16 at the time, and she hadn't yet been fully immersed in the sick
Yeah.
side of the industry. And I just thought they were very sweet. And I was so naive, so oblivious to everything. I was just this idiot that worked at a radio station that used to go out and interview these artists. And I thought it was all about songs and music. And I had no idea of all the stuff that I know now.
Yeah.
That's going on behind the scenes.
And had you probably wouldn't have entered the industry to that degree, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was never really a part of the industry machine in terms of being fully involved in it. I kind of skirted around the periphery as a DJ. So I worked for a couple of radio stations, but I never worked for any record companies or any other corporations like deep within the industry. I was just some guy that got sent in to interview a few artists, and I got sent all the records to play on the radio and in the clubs.
What stations were you on?
I was on, the main one I was on was Galaxy Radio in Bristol,
Okay.
England. And then I went to Oxford and did a bunch of radio stations there.
So the musicians that are involved in the music industry, do you think they are aware of what they're perpetrating on the whole, or are they largely caught up in a system where they're not really aware of what's going on?
Well, it's going to be layered. There's levels to the industry. So you got the real high rollers, and many of them will come from these important bloodline families. So they're literally born into the role. The career is created for them. And they're highly likely to be well trained in what their job is. They're going to know that it's all about social engineering, it's all about mass mind control, and they're there to play a public role and steer society and cultural attitudes in certain desired directions. Then you'll go a couple of levels below that, and you might have some very successful, very prolific artists who will be aware of part of the agenda, and they might be doing it, you know, going along to get along, or just to make the money, just to keep their record company overlords happy.
Yeah.
And then in the lower levels of the industry, you've got a load of naive artists with stars in their eyes who really do believe that it's all about fun and entertainment and catchy songs and glamorous lifestyles.
Even to a degree, though, they must have, unless they're entirely blind spiritually and symbology, like they're bound to see what's going on around them. You know, like the occult symbology now in most modern artists is insane. You know, like Lady Gaga, or I can't even remember what you call the rapper that had the blood in the shoes and stuff.
Oh yeah, Lil Nas X.
Like what on earth?
All these jokers.
So what would you say it's cost you personally to continue to ask questions instead of going along?
Well, I've had to burn all my bridges back to the old life. So if ever I woke up one morning and said, I'm done with all this, I'm not interested in researching the music industry or what goes on in society generally, I want to go back to Normie Land, I want to go get a corporate job,
Hospital
I want to
radio.
go and get a mortgage, I want to go and find a woman who is just into regular stuff and, you know, get into a relationship with her. That's not going to happen.
No.
all roads back to that way of life are now gone. So I'm now a part of an entirely different world and community or scene or movement, if you want to call it that. And most of the time, I'm very happy with that. But there are some days where I think, what have I done with my life?
Was there a moment where you would say it would have been easier just to go back to normie life than continue on with what you were doing?
I think it would have been easier
Yeah.
because I know a lot of things now. And I comprehend a lot of what really goes on in the world behind the scenes.
You can manipulate that too.
And a lot of it is very dark. And sometimes, if you're having a bad day and you allow all that information to weigh down on you, it can send you to a very dark place. And so there have been days where I've thought, I wish I didn't know this stuff. Because despite my best efforts to communicate it far and wide and get as many people as possible paying attention to it, nothing ever really changes. If we think about things like satanic ritual abuse and adrenochrome and all these horrible things that go on, there are survivors from those sort of scenes that bring this information to us and tell us how it all works. It's horrific.
It is, and that's one of my biggest worries with this podcast is that I never want it to be like trauma farming or, just where people are coming to get like a fix of, nefarious stories. Like there has to be some form of resolve or some form of redemption to these things, because the further into all these problems that you look, it all boils down to individuals as well. So what I said to you before we come on, I wanted to have a discussion about masculinity itself. So a lot of noise around masculinity at the moment. Most of it feels shallow, reactive, or monetized. So I'm more interested in what changes structurally that left so many men unanchored. So what do you think has changed structurally that has left so many males especially unanchored?
It comes down generally to social engineering by design.
Tavistock Institute.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the stuff gets done through Tavistock. That's the primary PSYOP centre of the world right there in London. And you've had behavioural scientists and anthropologists and psychologists who know how the human psyche works and therefore how to manipulate it, deliberately doing a number on society. It's been going on for decades, if not centuries. So we could think back to the 1960s, the sex, drugs and rock and roll revolution of that decade, which played out in music big time, but it also played out in other walks of life. And the ripples from all of that are still being felt now, 60 years on. And it's not let up since. The social engineers have just fine-tuned and tweaked their agendas a bit, but it's been continuous. And part of what they've been doing is trying to fracture society by driving a wedge between males and females, and also watering down the sacred masculine principle in nature, which is a very real thing. And this has been recognized by cultures for generations. There are elements of nature which are more geared towards the feminine, expressions of the feminine. Right-brained for the most part. And then there are expressions of masculinity or male components in nature, in creation generally. And you can see this in various foreign languages. I can remember learning French at school.
The male
and in French, you would have le and la for masculine and feminine. And I used to think, well, it's ridiculous. Why have you got two words for thee? Why can't it be like English where you just got one word for thee? Well, that's because when those languages were constructed, the architects recognized that there are masculine and feminine aspects to nature, and it expresses itself through those languages. So they make a whole lot more sense than English, where everything's just consolidated down into the. So there's a reminder that we've got these different components, and what's been getting done through the social engineering agendas is watering down what it is to be an authentic male. A war on masculinity, you might say.
You get like parodies of it. It's like a parody of what a man is supposed to be.
Right.
That's presented now. It's like
caricatures.
Bitches and Lamborghinis and Bugatti Veyrons. It's like, and
well, they call it toxic masculinity now, don't they? which is that's a catchy kind of phrase, which is straight out of Tavistock.
Of course, that's a new normal type of phrase. That
Right.
it's just rolled out ready, and that's what I always say. If there's catchphrases ready, and everybody's like singing off the same hymn
Yeah.
sheet, we're in a simulation / event that's being controlled.
If it's got a logo, a color, and a catchphrase, it's social engineering.
Yeah, it's Tavistock's fingerprints all over it. So.
Right.
You were saying there about the masculine and the feminine parts of nature. So obviously men do have historically had defined roles, whether people agree with that or not. What happens psychologically when those roles disappear and nothing meaningful is there to replace them?
Well, society breaks down into chaos, confusion, a lack of cohesion, a lack of unity. It just ceases to operate the way it was naturally designed to. I mean, I've had some questions recently through my so-called God series of videos that I've been doing since early 2024 about the true nature of this force that we would call God and the true nature of this realm, the true purpose of it. So I'm no longer making the claim that what we might think of as God, at least of this world, of this realm, is all loving and is all benevolent and created everything for our benefit. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But still, it's clear to see that encoded within nature and encoded within human physiology are some very clear feminine attributes and some very clear masculine attributes. And when you start trying to go against those, pitching one against the other, watering either of them down, or trying to transpose the roles that each have in creation, it's only ever going to end in chaos. And that's how the social engineers get off. They love creating chaos in society.
Big time.
Because when you've got chaos, you haven't got unity, you haven't got togetherness, you haven't got cooperation. And when chaos rules, psychopaths have a field day. And unfortunately, it's clear to see that human society is run by psychopaths.
It certainly does appear that way. So even in the generation that's, well, I'm 40 years of age, as hard as that might be to believe. But the generation that's came up
Youngster.
beneath us have like lost craftsmanship. There's not as many sparks, there's not as many plumbers and stuff coming out, not a plug by the way, but there's not as many tradespeople coming out. Just different things that were once just a given, that a man could work with his hands, or all these things are being slowly stripped away, even handwriting.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to mention that because everybody types things now. Many people just can't write. My handwriting has really suffered. I used to have great handwriting, but it's a bloody mess now because I type everything. So there's something that's been lost. All these natural arts and these natural crafts and professions, like you say, because AI is doing a lot of it now. It's just getting automated.
And I think that's the AI aspect is very purposeful. I mean, at this stage of open AI or whatever you want to refer to it as, we're being allowed to interact with it because we're basically building the brain of it, and it's just beginning to understand like all our human traits. Or I wouldn't be surprised if it has us down to individual bots, and going back into a database system where eventually, people rely on it to such a point that just they're asking questions, getting an answer, they're using it like Google. And when that's taken away, what will people agree to get access to that back, because it is being integrated into so many aspects of people's lives.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's clearly not a plan that has humanity's best interests at heart. It's insane when you look at how far it's developed so far, and this is only a fraction of the way that it's designed to go eventually. And it can be very scary and very overwhelming, particularly when you have children yourself, that have to grow up in this world. And again, it just goes back to what we were saying earlier. You can only do as much as you can do.
Even where your kids are concerned, though, that's the hardest, obviously, one to detach from, because you can't detach from it, but you can only show the correct way and parent the correct way, and it's still up to them to make the decisions. It's very hard to let go of that. But in society, I think one of the biggest changes came when social welfare, is what Americans would know it as, and the brew, or the you know the dole over here, where people get their job seekers allowance or whatever, not else like that. That incentivized single parenthood and destroyed the nuclear family. And I don't think that was by mistake either. It almost seems like a social engineering tool as well, because they're never too willing to help us. So when something is packaged to us as a good thing, I'm very suspicious. I look at what's came off it, and well, your thoughts.
Just makes me wonder what human society would look like if it had been left to its own devices without a psychopathic so-called elite ruling class. If these sick entities had never come into existence and we'd just been allowed to find our own way and develop systems to work with each other and cooperate and help each other out, just imagine how different human society would look to how it does now. Because most people, I think, just want to get on and help others.
If they're not in the struggling circumstances, if everybody has their needs met, people are generally good people.
Right. And it's not that difficult to see how society could be structured in a much more fair, just way for everyone concerned. The first step is removing these bloody psychos that run everything. Because if they weren't there exerting their influence and their control over the rest of us, we would be freer to explore these different ways of living. Unfortunately, clearly, they've always been with us because it's a generational bloodline thing. You can go back centuries and find the same families that were running society and all its different aspects back then, and they still are.
I had a guy on last night, Gary Wayne, who's the author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and he has tracked the genealogy of all these families right back to Nephilim bloodlines from the biblical times. So it really does go all the way back. It's insane,
So it seems they've always been with us. And again, it goes back to
before us even would be the argument.
My questioning of the true nature of this realm. What is this place in which that state of affairs is even allowed to play out? Because if we did, I don't want to steer the conversation too far in this direction, but if we really did have a loving, caring, benevolent God or force or entity that really did want the best of it for us, then why would the potential even be there for pain and suffering and trauma and all this chaos that we've had throughout known human history? That's a big question. Talking about big questions to have in life.
I'm going to try and answer it. So I would come at it from a Christian point of view, and it's not through want. It annoys me that I look at it from a Christian point of view now, but I've searched the entire world and came back to the book that stood the test of time. And, the old questions of like, how does a loving God allow a child to die of cancer? Or, he loved us that much to give us free will to choose to follow him or to not, and I'm not saying that everything is bad as the devil and everything is good as God, but we're interacting in the world and it's free will. He's not stepping in to stop you from making a mistake. You make that mistake, you deal with the consequences, you grow or you don't grow from it, and you carry on. I don't think it's a question of how does a loving, benevolent God allow this to take place in the world. It's more a case of we need to take personal agency over our own lives.
It's not a level playing field, though, is it? That we've been born into. When you're born into a world controlled by psychopaths who have all the money and all the wealth and all the control, and it's all you've ever known, the game is rigged.
Oh, 100%. And the Bible.
It's not a fair fight.
The Bible's very clear about that as well, that this is the kingdom of, the devil. You're not in for a good time down here.
And also, I don't know about you, but I don't remember signing up for this. I don't remember signing a contract saying, yes, I agree to be born. I agree to be this man that's going to grow up in England and encounter all this stuff. Nevertheless, here we all are.
Of course.
Left to deal with it.
But it's also an amazing experience too. Life as a whole. Obviously there's a lot of hardship, more so these days if you take in economics and all the rest, but just being able to feel things like love or a connection with another person is an amazing experience to have. So like I take the bad just to have the experience of the good, whether or not I agreed to be here or not, you know.
Well, it is great when we can experience things like joy and happiness and love.
When that
But
happened.
I've done a lot of research and I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've spoken to people that have come out of satanic ritual abuse in families. And they've told me some of the stuff that they've seen and some of the stuff that they were forced to do.
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
And I think if you've had that kind of life, you might disagree about how balanced everything is and how wonderful joy and love and happiness is, because these people have experienced very little, if any, of that.
Oh no, of
So
course.
that's why I say it's not a level playing field. The game is rigged, because not everyone has happy lives.
No.
And so for me, that raises the question again, how can that level of suffering even be allowed by any kind of loving, benevolent God, free will or no free will? Because if you're born into one of those families, you don't really have a lot of free will. You can't break out of it.
Well, that would be, from biblical standpoint, that would be like a generational curse. You know, if that's the sort of family
Right.
they're
So
born
what have
into,
you
yeah.
done to deserve inheriting a generational curse just through the very act of being born, which you didn't ask to happen?
Well, evidently you don't. And I think that these sorts of questions would explain why there is a creator, because our brains can't even conceive them
Well,
properly.
there's another question. Why is it that we're here without any kind of guidebook, any kind of manual?
We have a Bible. That's a guidebook and a manual.
Well, a Christian would say that. Then a Muslim would come along and say, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. My book has all the answers. It's all about the Quran. Then a Jew would come along and say, oh, you're both wrong. You're both wrong. It's my holy book. So everyone's got an idea of how we should be living and the true nature of God and stuff. But who's to say that this man is right and this man is wrong? What if they're both wrong? It's just ideas.
Well,
That's all we're left with. Ideas, interpretations, opinions, because there's no definitive guidebook that we can know comes from an authentic source to tell us how to live, and even who we are and what this place is.
Even the Bible, I mean, people rant and rave about the fucking King James version. I mean, that was just a psyop in general, you know, to bring in the divine right to rule, etc. So, like, I understand that institutional Christianity is a horrible thing, and it's been used to oppress and used to, like, direct nations and people in a certain way that's not for God or not for positive reasons. But I think that where did that start from? I've lost my train of thought completely.
We're talking about holy books and guides in life, so, manuals in life.
Like, nobody's in a position to say ultimately what's right or what's wrong for another person, and that's what personal agency is for. So it's not what resonates with you. Like, even if you take the Bible and the Torah, which is the Jewish book and the Christian book, there's a lot more to historically back them up than there would be, i.e., this is not going to go down very well, but the Quran, you know, and the Quran will cite Jesus and it will cite the Torah and it will cite the New Testament in different places, but then it will just go off on its own non-historical tangent. And there's a lot more to back up what's in the Torah and what's in the New Testament and the Old Testament, which is the Torah anyway, than there is any other book on the earth.
There's a lot of noise and detail in all these books, though, which, in my view, is unnecessary. If you had half a dozen holy books from around the world, you'd be getting told what you can eat on certain days, what you must wear, how a woman must dress before she goes out in public, all these rules and regulations and all this dogma. It's overcomplication. It's really very simple. If you want a code for how to live morally in life, ask yourself the question before you conduct any kind of behavior. Is this taking away the rights of any other living sentient being? Is this causing harm to any other living sentient being? If the answer is no, it's a right.
So basically,
you can go right ahead and conduct that behavior. You're doing no harm. There's no injured party. It's really that simple. So all these books and all these institutions should just be teaching that. And if that kind of morality were taught in schools, just imagine how different human society would be.
It would be utopia, really.
Yeah. And And it speaks volumes that it's not taught in schools.
Well, considering if you were to condense down the message of the very thick Bible as it is do unto others as you do unto yourself, pretty much what you're saying.
It's a pretty good rule to follow.
It's a no-brainer, really. I don't know how people can treat others with evil intent, because like if I in the past, like I've not lived shall we say a very clean life up until recently, but anytime I'd done anything with intent towards another person, the guilt inside, like it wasn't worth the payoff. Do you know what I mean? Whatever you may have gained from that manipulation or whatever, is that part of people's been seared? Empathy? Has empathy disappeared on the large? Or
I think that tells us a lot, because we are imbued with what we call a conscience, or most people are. Obviously, you've got psychopaths and sociopaths in society, and those people are never going to live morally or listen to their conscience. But most people, the vast overwhelming majority, if they wrong another person, as you say, guilt starts to eat away at them, because they know instinctively that that's not how you're supposed to live. And I think the reason people do other people over and treat them badly is purely as a result of how difficult life has been made for everyone. It's a competitive dog-eat-dog society. Culture is kind of inculcated within people, this idea that you've got to get ahead and you've got to beat the next man at whatever it is, because that's going back to social engineering again. It's the way society has been deliberately structured by these sick psychopaths and Satanists. And again, we go back to the idea that if they'd never been there and humanity had been allowed to evolve naturally, people would be listening to that voice of conscience that we all have, and people would be treating each other much more fairly. I think people are generally good.
Yeah.
A lot of people would disagree with me on that, but I think at our base core nature, if we're not psychopaths and sociopaths, then we don't really want to hurt other people.
When people are given the opportunity to act in integrity, they normally choose integrity.
Right.
So, like I was saying to you before we started, I have changed the shop to a pay what you can, or pay it forward or don't pay at all model. And 9 people out of 10 are paying that bit extra so somebody can get a free pop on a Monday. Or, it really does show that most people are good when given the opportunity.
Right. Well, that's great to hear. Yeah. That kind of backs up the way I see things. There's going to be a few exceptions. There'll always be a few people that will take the piss and try and exploit others. But I think most would choose to support, their fellow man or woman if they can, because it goes back to that's how you would want to be treated.
So at the moment, especially within the UK and Ireland, there's a lot of Indigenous angry males. Would you see that as redirected frustration, or like loss of personal agency, or what? Obviously there's the clear paradigm that we're being given to play within, which is immigrants bad, and maybe they are, but like, who's bringing the immigrants in would be my point. Why are we looking sideways instead of looking up? But it seems we have a lot of angry men that have they know something's wrong, but they can't articulate it. They can't put their finger on it. It just seems to be like an air of frustration.
You're talking about white men in society.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, clearly the immigration thing is an agenda. You've got the Kalergi plan, which is well documented. This agenda that goes back many decades, and it's the systematic undermining of nations through immigration, destroying a nation's natural culture and identity from the inside by bringing people in from other parts of the world. That's an agenda. And the thing about a lot of social engineering agendas is they seem very noble and well-meaning on the surface. So this particular one is presented as, these poor people from these various parts of the world that are war-torn and full of poverty and stuff, we've got to help them out. They're our fellow man, so we've got to offer them the welfare if we can. And on the surface, yes, that sounds great. Who's going to disagree with that? But that's the cover story, the Cinderella fairy story. And all these agendas come with one.
Yeah.
You've also got the transgender LGBTQ thing, which is an agenda.
Clearly.
And that's presented as, we shouldn't be intolerant of people with different sexuality. And no, we shouldn't. But you don't need an agenda to tell you that. It should be a natural thing. So on the surface, that one seems very noble. Oh, people of different sexual orientations are being oppressed. And then you've got climate change, which is a massive scam. And that's presented as, we're destroying the planet and the ecosystem is suffering and we've all got to do our bit to reduce carbon emissions and all this sort of stuff. So it's another cover story. So whenever it becomes an agenda, it doesn't have humanity's best interests in mind.
Do you think there's a certain aspect that the nation has to be demoralised enough, national identity-wise, for that even to get a foot in the door to allow this to happen? Because I believe that the nation, Ireland and the UK, for a long time have just been sleepwalking through politics and life in general, and they've woke up in 2025 and every house is filled with somebody that they don't recognise, and it's like, well, had you been more in touch with life, this may not have took place.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this particular agenda that we're talking about does seem to be one that has got the attention of a lot of people. It's woken up a lot of people, particularly white men.
Yeah.
So in England, I drive around a lot and I see now a lot of English flags on motorway bridges and in people's gardens. They're all over the place. And it's an expression of national pride and national identity because people have realised that this is being eroded systematically through immigration because it's got way out of control. It's not just about bringing in refugees from war-torn parts of the world. It's about destroying the culture of the nation. That's what it is.
Excuse me.
So it's quite surprising that things like COVID, which was a massive scam, didn't wake people up. Most people bought it. And many of the people that are now paying attention to the whole immigration issue would have sleepwalked through COVID, worn their masks, shut down their businesses, stayed at home. So they didn't see that one for what it was. And they should have done because all the evidence was there. It was so obvious. But they are waking up to the fact that they don't recognise their country anymore. That seems to be something which is getting a lot of people on the same page.
But then it's the same with conspiracy research and all the rest. I feel like there's an element of conspiracy research that there's a paradigm within which you're allowed to play. And it's the same with, you say like this is waking people up, but it's waking people up still within the paradigm where it's an us versus them setup, and they're able to divide again, because you have maybe, I don't know, percentages wise, but say there's a lot of people who are starting to notice that their identity's being eroded, and then you have the Antifa crew who are, accept everybody, but they wouldn't give a room in their house to house any of these people. It's just the virtue signal,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm concerned too, and many other nations might be sleepwalking towards a massive trap that's been set for people. So we've got all these immigrant men, because most of the ones that seem to be coming in are young men. Where's all the grannies? Where's all the aunties? Where's all the
women and children,
the babies? Yeah? We don't see those. So it is concerning that possibly these armies of young sort of fighting age men who are being housed in these hotels with the government paying for it all are there as a standing army, should it be needed, should there be a massive uprising of the indigenous population. And, my biggest concern, and it's a concern of many other people that I've spoken to and many other broadcasters who speak about this, is that this could be the ultimate trap that's being set. They want people to rise up and try and take back their national identity. And the minute they do and all unite on the same page, these armies are going to get released to put them down. So I really hope it doesn't come to that. But I can't think of many other reasons why all these young men have been housed in hotels and have been there for years.
I agree with that sentiment pretty much 99.9%. I think that's exactly what's going on. And
That's a thing in Northern Ireland as well?
100%. And it's even worse down south of Ireland at the moment. But I think we're very much playing into their hands by going out and, street patrols and all this fucking bullshit. And it's mainly by men who are looking for a form of identity of any description. If they weren't doing that, they would join a paramilitary. If they weren't doing that, they would be robbing a bank. Or let's see, well, certainly the representatives we have in this country, I'll probably get shot for saying that, but it's pathetic. The people that aren't even present in their own home with their own wives and their own kids are shouting about save our women and save our kids. It's like mango.
Well, this is something I've noticed with the conspiracy truth movement generally, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
It tends to be a magnet for all kinds of misfits in society. I discovered this early on when I got involved in the whole scene and I started attending meetups and conferences and going to festivals and stuff like that. You tend to get all kinds of oddballs that don't fit into regular society. So they're looking for a crowd or a tribe to be a part of. And so they gravitate towards the truth scene because it's alternative, it's not mainstream. So you do get a lot of nutters turning up at these events. I see them every summer. I do a bunch of festivals and you get all kinds of strange people there.
And there's a lot of the stereotype conspiracy theorists out there, the tinfoil hat type.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of those guys out there, which each to their own, but I feel like it's not an identity. Truth is truth and lies are lies. It's not,
Right.
People attach an identity to, I'm a truth seeker. Well, I'm a truth speaker, and I would prefer to deal in truth over misinformation if were possible. But what we were saying there about the fighting age men, etc., just from a homeless point of view, imagine being homeless in the United Kingdom and seeing what the government are able to do for asylum seekers, migrants, whatever you want to call them. Provide them with a hotel, provide them with a bicycle, provide them with a mobile phone and a daily allowance, but just a middle finger to the indigenous homeless. It's
right. Seems you've got to change your name, go over to France, get in a dinghy, come into Dover, and you'll be sorted.
It's just horrible. And how people don't see that aspect. All these so-called virtuous beings who are just out shouting for the next current thing. If they weren't out wanting you to get their job, it was, fight in Ukraine or bring the Ukrainian people into your home and all. It's almost like they do not have the ability of independent thought. There seems to be a certain element of society that is just activated when it needs to. And
Well, a lot of people like to be directed in how to think. We saw this during COVID. They were looking to the government to tell them how to live, when they could leave their house, when they could see their relatives, when they were allowed to go shopping, how long they were allowed to be out of their house. People were happy to take instruction on those sort of things. So unfortunately, a lot of people, it seems, aren't capable of thinking for themselves. They just want to be part of a hive mindset, doing what the rest of the crowd does. And that's a real problem.
I'm going to propose something which would be perceived sexist, but I feel that society is allowed to fall when man goes to sleep. I see men as the spiritual stewards of the household, and you remove a man from the house, it's going to fall, and you remove enough homes from a community, the community's going to fall, and, it's just a knock-on effect. So that's why I keep coming back to personal agency. A lot of these men are just heart scared of actually sitting in silence and, getting up, going to work, being honest to yourself and to your family without anyone saying it. They don't know how to interact anymore. It's a very strange time to be alive and be aware, because men don't seem to want personal agency anymore.
Yeah. And clearly, there are roles that were structured for males and for females in creation. It's almost taboo to talk about it now because of how the social engineering has made it such a touchy subject. But men, let's be real, are generally speaking physically stronger than women. So that makes them the natural candidates to go out there and provide for the family. And that's the way it would have been in the caveman era, hunter-gatherers, you know. The women are the homekeepers. They birth the children and nurture and raise the children. That's a role that they're more suited for.
100%.
You know, their bodies are suited for that, whereas male bodies are more suited for going out there and doing what needs to be done.
Obviously, a male can offer care to a child and a woman can, you know, provide, but
yeah, of course.
Either way, they're both sort of...
But there are natural roles, it's clear to see, for each of the genders.
Yeah.
And systematically, the lines have been blurred between these.
On purpose.
And women have been told you can do anything a man can do. And this was what was going on in the 1960s as part of the counterculture. I've researched this endlessly. You had people like Gloria Steinem, who was the mother of modern feminism, so to speak. And her whole message to women in the 60s was, why are men the only ones that are going out there in the workplace and earning money for the family? You should be doing this as well, women. And the idea behind that was getting women out of their natural nurturing motherhood roles in the home, getting them into the workplace, putting their kids into state-sponsored care at ever earlier ages so the indoctrination can begin, and also contributing to the taxation system by having women earning money for corporations and generating taxable income as well as men.
It's almost like it benefited the higher-ups, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it was designed to do.
Imagine
it didn't benefit families.
Isn't it amazing how most of these social changes never do benefit families?
Funny thing that, yeah.
Only destroy the family because, you know, a close-knit family is sort of insular. And, you know, what I was saying earlier on about the introduction of social welfare, if we didn't even have... If we stripped it back before social welfare, we had to rely on community. You know, we couldn't just get free money. We couldn't just, you know, get a free car if you pretend you're disabled or whatever you do in this country. And you had to rely on one another, which I think brings out better in everybody, you know.
Right. So a contemporary expression of that same dynamic is how in so many families you'll find 4 or 5 family members in 4 or 5 different rooms on 4 or 5 different devices, streaming a film, playing a game, messaging somebody on Facebook, none of them talking with each other, not sitting around a meal table anymore and communicating with each other. And that's all by design as well. That's not something that's just randomly happened.
No.
That's why all these devices were brought in. That's why Wi-Fi and broadband was put everywhere, because the social engineers wanted to further break down family cohesion in that kind of way. And they've done a really good job of that one, clearly.
Really good job. And if you were to strip masculinity back to first principles, what would you say remains? Like, what are the foundational principles for masculinity?
A natural, authentic male is supposed to be a protector and a provider. That's the role of a male.
Which does not equate to dominating anybody. You know, I think,
of course,
this is where like the toxic masculinity pollution has come in. I mean, we've been sold so many different types of masculinity in the last 10 to 15 years. We've got gym bros, we have like intellectual, you know, everything's a type. But like no individual is a type, you know, everybody's unique. So I think we've been sold, like, let's use Andrew Tate as an example. I might agree with some of the stuff he says, but the parody of masculinity coming out of him is what I'd be talking about on the whole. Like, I think that is a big problem for young men. Like, they're crying out for a father role, and they look out and they see an Andrew Tate, and they think it's all about Bugatti Veyrons and money, and it's not.
I don't know a lot about Andrew Tate, to be honest, but there's certainly been the loss of a lot of professions, going back to what we were talking about earlier, not least plumbers, but a lot of these working class professions that men in previous generations would have gravitated towards, because so much has been automated now and AI is doing so many of these jobs, and society has just changed in so many ways technologically. A lot of these old professions just aren't there. I mean, if you go back 100 years, you'd find young men going into, I don't know, shipbuilding and steel work and these kind of industries. I'm not saying those industries were great to work in, but they were natural professions for authentic men.
Yeah.
And they're not there anymore.
And there's no, like, if a man is watching this or feels lost or evil, like, what would you say restores order in a man?
If he's lost to evil?
No, if he's feeling lost or he's feeling like evil or feels like he's detached or whatever, like, what would you say would be the start of restoring order in your life for a man?
Getting back to basics and reminding yourself of what the natural role of a male is, but also going back to that moral code of do no harm. Don't treat people in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself. I mean, you'll never go wrong with that rule. Nobody.
No matter what.
Nobody will ever go wrong with that rule.
No.
And I can only imagine what a worldwide human society would look like if everyone were taught that role from the earliest age, that rule, and conducted their behaviours in accordance with it. This world would be unrecognizable from the one we do have.
So I believe that you have imagined that in your newest book, in your newest novel, what it would look like on the other side.
Well, at the very end of it, yeah, it's been a long, hard, plodding journey for the characters to get there. But I've just written my third truth fiction novel.
Okay.
And I really enjoy the process of stepping away from the music books and the non-fiction stuff and writing fiction. So the first book that I did was the Cause and the Cure in 2019. And that was set in Oxford, my hometown, in the early 90s. And it was full of period detail, my memories of what life was like in the 90s. There's a case in point. I mean, if you take it back to 1990, which is where that story was set, that's 36 years ago now. But human society was unrecognizable then from what it is now.
Big time.
I've got aspects of the narrative in that story where you got individuals out in the street and they need to urgently contact somebody. You didn't just pull out your mobile phone in 1990 because very few people had them. So you had to fish around in your pocket for a 50p piece, find a call box, put the coin in and make a public call that way. And there's also references to things like fax machines, analog technology, because a lot of that story was set in a radio station and it was reels of tape. It's before computers came along. The DJs on daytime radio shows in the early 90s used to play the music off of 7-inch vinyl. They would actually queue up an actual record with a needle and play the record that way. Everything was before computers. So it was just unrecognizable from the way we do things now. And then the second story was The Gift and the Curse. That was set in 2001. So it's many of the same characters, but it's against the backdrop of the events of 9/11 at the end of 2001. And this third story that I'm just finishing up now is called The Tragedy and the Triumph. And this is set in 2020 against the backdrop of the COVID nonsense. And it's the same characters, but it's 30 years on from the first story. So they've all been through a lot. They've advanced in life. And there's a lot of studying of how these characters have changed for better and for worse. And I've really enjoyed the process of projecting aspects of myself onto many of the characters. I find that's very cathartic. If you're dealing with a lot of personal shit yourself, if you're a fiction writer, it's very healing to be able to
live it out on the page. Almost.
Yeah. Give many of those traits and those attributes to your characters, and just kind of put it onto them, and let them carry it.
Well, I think to have a large enough emotional understanding to write a book, character-based book, you have to have been through quite a bit as well. So,
well, they say write about what you know.
Yeah, I assume life has not always been rosy either. You've had your ups and your downs.
Yeah. In recent years, not too many roses in the garden, lots of thorns and thistles.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not been too rosy. So I've put a lot of that into the story.
And would you say the process of writing that book helped restore something in you, agency-wise? Yeah.
Definitely cathartic. Yeah. Definitely makes me feel so much better to be able to express myself through fiction. Because the great thing about it is you can have anything happen that you want.
Plus, you can get in a lot of truth in fiction that you may not be able to.
Exactly. You could put a lot of truth bombs into the mouths of your characters. You can have them say anything you want to say. And you're putting that message out there to anyone that might read that book. They're after a gripping, thrilling story, but along the way, they're going to get a whole load of truth dropped on them if they're taking note of what these characters are saying.
Yeah, like I find writing, I've never written a book, but I've always written poetry or just written in general. And it's what we were talking about, handwriting, just that relationship with writing on a piece of paper is such a cathartic process in and of itself, even if you're not having any goal inside, like writing a book, just writing your thoughts pen to paper is, I feel it makes things a lot easier to process. Like I've just recently started journaling and stuff as well, and I feel writing is clearly being taken away for a purpose because it connects you back to another self that seems to be very distant for a lot of people now, you know.
One thing I've noticed is that out of great pain and great trauma comes great art. So you'll often find the very best songs, the very best poems, the very best books were written by people that were going through a lot of personal turmoil at that time. And it causes you to channel a lot of that into your art. Because it's got to get out there somewhere. It's got to be expressed. And it just leads to incredible creativity. I think if everything's going great for you in your life and it's all rosy and everything's nice, you're not really going to be churning out classic stories and classic poems because you've got no reason to need to.
No spectrum to to base it off. You know, there's no,
right.
They're just sort of coasting along with no manic highs or no manic lows.
Right.
Whereas they're to really, you know, project. It's like, I feel that life is, well, it's clearly a journey, but we have so much more control than we would like to allow ourselves to believe. You know, it's very easy to blame governments or to blame this or to blame that, but if we haven't got our own houses in order or our own selves in order, like we can't really be out on the street beating our chests about conspiracy this, conspiracy that. You know, it's like start from within and then people will take you seriously. You know, if you haven't got your own house in order, it's like,
right.
Why? It's like this country's falling to pieces, but we'll be fighting over Israel, Palestine. You know, like why are we not sorting our own problems before?
Yeah, true. Again, it's another agenda. You know, people are being entrained to think a certain way. They think their thoughts are their own, but they don't realize that they've lapped it all up from watching the news or from listening to what other people say or from movies. That's a big one. Movies, TV shows, what celebrities say, famous people, their messages. That's how a lot of it gets done because people look up to public figures and celebrities and hang on their every word. And they don't realize that they're playing out roles and they're pushing agendas and they've had those careers gifted to them. These famous rock stars, you know, people like Bono that get up there and pontificate about aid to Africa or whatever it may be. Do people really believe that's coming from Bono's heart? That's a personal thing that he himself feels versus the reason he's successful, the reason he's famous, the reason you've heard of him is because he was put on that pedestal. He was elevated to that status. The career was given to him. so that he can be pushing these kind of messages out. He's just one example, but he is a good one.
He's a very good one. He's very hard to like, Bono. I
Yeah.
can't bring myself to like him at all. But a lot of people, men especially these days, I feel use past trauma and past pain as permission to be assholes, as opposed to just dealing with their shit and moving past it. You know, talking as somebody who did use trauma as an excuse for nearly 40 years, it's been a mind blower for me just to stop, assess, and move past and go, my God, like, how did I allow myself to be dictated to by this for so many years? You know, it's, well, your thoughts?
Everyone's carrying around trauma, and it starts at birth. Birth trauma, you know, just the very act of being born is traumatic, and that goes into your psyche, DNA and into your psyche, and you're carrying that around for the rest of your life, because we don't really know where we come from. Everyone's got an opinion on it, that we come from some sort of spirit realm or some kind of other state of existence, but none of us really know. And so it's very traumatic when you're a child to become conscious of the fact that you're in this world. And it's a very tough world to exist in. So that's one form of trauma that everyone's carrying around. And that's not counting all the other sort of stuff that you may experience. Trauma from your family members, from your upbringing, trauma from attending school, all other kinds of traumas that people carrying around with them.
Yeah, and it's it really is about mindset, isn't it? You know, how you process these things. Like, obviously, as you said, there's people that are born into situations that are absolutely fucking horrific, you know, where it's institutional abuse and all the rest. Like, it's going to be very hard to find the positive in that situation. But I'm talking about when you get past, you know, that environment, you still ultimately do have a choice in how you interact with the world from that point onwards. And what would you say, just sort of close on this, like, what would you say society and the whole misunderstands or has wrong currently about masculinity, leaving off the toxic side of it, because I mean it's been curated for us. So what do you think is misunderstood currently, and what aspects of masculinity do you feel need to return to stabilize culture?
More clearly defined roles in society and in the family, because the lines have been blurred so much. Going back to the 1960s, which again is when I would pinpoint a lot of this stuff getting done. Isn't it interesting that in 1967, it was illegal in England to be homosexual. So if you were openly gay, you could get imprisoned for that.
Yeah.
Here we are 60 years later, and you're more likely to go to prison for criticizing somebody for being gay. This is not any kind of judgment on anyone's lifestyle or sexuality or whatever. It's an observation on how effective social engineering is. Because in the 60s, it suited the controllers of organized society to have homosexual people like pigeonholed and over in the corner here and not a regular part of society. And then for whatever reason, at some point, it was decided that, no, they're going to be integrated into the rest of society. And in fact, they're going to be elevated and promoted. And,
above, yeah.
you know, that kind of lifestyle is going to be celebrated. And now if you oppose it in any way or have anything to say about it, you're a bigot and you're the one that everyone's going to shun from polite society and look down on. So it's a masterclass in how societal attitudes are cultivated and changed over time.
And even when you're aware of it, you'll find, like, I find myself self-censoring before I speak. Like, I'll give precursors, you know, like whenever I said that about clearly men have defined roles, I said that maybe not everybody likes that, you know, whereas I should have just said the statement and let it rest.
That's right.
We're all victim to the mind control. But Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time coming on with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you. And
Good to be here.
like, share, and subscribe? And what website? And what's the best place to get your books and stuff? Just Amazon or?
Yeah, all my books are on Amazon. So I've got 4 volumes in my Musical Truth series. This is the latest one that came out last year. No One's Dad's a Plumber. I've got my 3 novels. Well, 2 of them are published. And the third one is The Tragedy and the Triumph, which I'm looking to get out by early March. And they're all on Amazon. There's audiobook versions of all my books, which I've narrated myself.
That just came out, didn't it?
Yeah,
An audio version? Yeah.
There's an audio version of this. They take bloody forever, but they're all on Audible. So if people like getting their books from Audible, you can find them all on there. But if people want to get copies of the books from me personally, they can email me, markdevlinuk@gmail.com. And my main website is djmarkdevlin.com. And from there, you've got links through to my video channels where you can get the books and everything else that I do.
And I've actually been watching quite a few of your podcasts. Did you just get your YouTube channel back?
Yeah, just recently I got my original YouTube channel back, which I started in 2008. And it ran all the way to 2022. I was up to 63,000 subscribers. And then overnight, it just disappeared. They took me down. And that channel was down from early 2022 to, I think it was November. It just got reinstated. It popped back up one day.
So I have a bit of a theory about that one before we go. So this has seemed to have happened with a lot of creators.
Yeah, many others. Yeah, many
So do you
others saw it
think
at the same
maybe
time.
everyone's being brought back onto the likes of YouTube and these platforms to see who will accept the digital ID and who won't? And then we'll know who is the actual truth tellers and who isn't, you know.
That's one idea. I've also thought that maybe we're being coerced into saying something outrageous under Starmer's bloody communist regime where people are getting jailed for tweets. Maybe they're just trying to get loads of us to say something that will give them the justification to try and throw us in jail.
I was arrested 3 times in a month for Facebook posts.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, done over 50 hours in jail, like just holding cells.
Damn.
Over 3 separate times.
What sort of stuff were you talking about?
Let's see stuff along the lines of if you're born with a penis, you're a man.
Wow.
Yeah.
So fact then,
Yeah, it's
basically.
not like I wasn't like, you know, like calling for Sherwood Airport to be bombed or anything extreme. Literally just biological stuff or
Unbelievable.
like gobsmacked. So and then,
It's like saying that's a teacup and being told, no, it's a lawnmower.
well,
No, it's a teacup. No, you're going to jail now because you're not acknowledging it's a lawnmower.
Well, that's where we're at, or certainly that's where it would appear we're at, where we're not allowed to believe any more what our eyes see or what our ears hear. We have to just, you know, what,
Who would ever have believed that we would have got to this?
1984 certainly wasn't foreshadowing this in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But look, yeah, thank you very much, guys. And if you could like, share, and subscribe, and get Mark's books over on Amazon and his website. So thank you very much.
Done with casting pearls amongst the swine. 'Cause each of us is running out of time. It's already started silent. You won't hear a chime. You'll be measured and punished for each heavenly crime.